Every human on the planet wants to feel like they're enough, and so we do a lot of things to gain approval. But somewhere along the way, we started confusing approval with self-worth. The more people cheer for us, the more validated we feel. But the moment that cheering stops, we do need to start wondering who we'd be without it. In the episode of the podcast you're about to hear, former NFL player Chase Winovich shares what happened when he reached the top of his dream and realized that the crowd's approval couldn't tell him who he was anymore. You'll understand why we're wired to seek validation and why criticism hurts so deeply, and how to finally let go of the need to be approved by anyone else. So I want you to picture this episode like a movie in your mind. We're about to bring together science, story, and sound to help you rewrite the way you define what it means to be enough. Welcome to Better Beliefs. Sometimes it feels like our entire life is a chase to prove that we're enough. It starts small and it starts early. From the gold stars we get in preschool to our parents telling us they're proud of us or getting a nod of approval from a coach or a teacher. All those things make us feel good, like other people are confirming that we're on the right track. When we're little, we need that because we're just learning how to navigate ourselves and how to navigate the world around us. But somewhere along the line, that need for validation grows some pretty sharp teeth. It starts driving our choices about what we do, who we become, what we strive for, and how we see ourselves. And it all seems to make sense, at least biologically. It wasn't too long ago in the cosmic scheme of things that belonging meant survival, and other people needed to approve of you if you were going to belong. Our ancient nervous systems learned that being accepted was the difference between life and death. You were on your own if you weren't accepted, and that meant you weren't going to last too long. So the dopamine hit we get when someone praises us, that's not a weakness, it's wiring. But here's the catch. The world we live in now feeds our nervous system like an endless slot machine. We put one unit of effort in and see what happens when the wheels spin. Likes, followers, job titles, trophies, it's all modern currency for the same old question. Are you enough yet? And let's be real, most of us don't think so. That's true whether we feel like we should have been further by now in our lives, or even if we've reached the highest levels of achievement. That second part, with not feeling like enough even when we've reached the highest levels, is where we're going in this episode.
For me, I think that sort of process, right, of externalizing your validation didn't start and stop with me. It's your entire extended family, it's your friends, and really everybody that's along the journey, which is different than a lot of careers, right? You don't have your crunching numbers on an Excel spreadsheet. People aren't like tweeting about it, aren't watching the tape of your performance and evaluating it week in, week out.
That's Chase Winovich. And he got to the highest level anyone can get in the profession he chose, only to find that it came with a microscope, magnifying the most vulnerable parts of himself. Through his story, we're going to take a new look at what it means to be enough. And don't be surprised if by the end of this episode, you've got a different view of what it means for you too. Welcome to Better Beliefs. What if the only thing standing in your way is what you believe about yourself, your life, or what's possible? Thousands of people have faced that same question and discovered the power to shift reality itself. I'm Brent Kokel, and on Better Beliefs, I tell the stories of real people who changed everything by first changing their minds. There's a moment we all go through in school where a teacher or guidance counselor asks every kid in the class what they want to be when they grow up. When the guidance counselor at Pleasant Hills Junior High in Jefferson Hills, Pennsylvania asked that question to a group of 8th graders one afternoon in 2009, she got a lot of the answers you'd expect. Some kids wanted to be firefighters, others wanted to be nurses. Lots of them had no idea what they wanted to be yet. Then it came to Chase Winovich.
And I stood up in front of everybody and I said, I want to play in the NFL. And, what she had responded to was, well, you better consider backup options. The chances of you doing that are slim to none.
She may not have said it in so many words, but she delivered a clear message that she thought Chase probably wasn't good enough to make it to the NFL. And in her defense, most kids aren't. To put that whole thing in context, a little less than 3% of high school football players go on to play at Division I colleges. Those are the biggest schools whose games are on national TV every Saturday from August to November. And only 1.6% of the kids who play at those Division I schools make it to the NFL. So the odds were stacked against Chase. Still, hearing a grown-up say he wasn't enough didn't sit right with him.
And I just remember thinking, how does she know that it's slim to none? What my particular chances are? You God? And I said, we'll see.
What she may not have known is that Chase grew up in a football family. He had an older brother playing at a Division I college, and he had natural talent.
I realized, wait a second, I'm really fast. I could run for days. I could hit people. I'm bigger than my peers.
Those traits like being fast, having stamina, being aggressive, and even being big physically carried a lot of weight when it came to Chase fitting in with his family.
My brother had taught me in high school when I was going to my first high school open practice. He said, Chase, and I'll never forget this, but he said they could take anything away from you. They could talk about how small you are. They could talk about your muscles. They could talk about your hair. They could talk about anything. One thing that they can and never will, and you can't let them take away from you, is that they will not outwork you.
So Chase worked hard and had a breakout season his junior year at Jefferson Hills High School when he played linebacker. That breakout season led to scholarship offers from the biggest Division I schools, places like Tennessee, Florida State, Arkansas, and Ohio State. But Chase ultimately picked the University of Michigan, where he was All-Conference twice, an All-American in 2018, and then he was voted team MVP by his fellow players.
Look at this. How about a sack, fumble, score, Winovich with the play.
If you type Chase's name into the search bar on YouTube, the first video that pops up is titled "The Most Passionate Player in College Football," which does a good job of describing Chase's emotions while he was playing.
What made me maybe special, I was saying earlier about physical stature, there's something that overcompensates it, was my passion, was the way that I played the game, was the fact that I didn't care about being disposable, about, just throwing it all away.
During his senior year at Michigan, Chase realized he was close to making that dream he first shared in 8th grade of playing in the NFL actually happen.
I remember going to my buddy, one of my roommates at the time. I had said to him, I said, it's I could actually do this. I realized then that making the NFL wasn't some pipe dream, wasn't something I got to go consider backup options. It's I could play ball. And I think it was all the years of training and that mindset which brought intensity to the workouts that I did, to the field, that ultimately put me in that position in the first place. It wasn't something that just kind of was a prerequisite for that opportunity rather than the opposite.
And then in 2019, he did.
Super Bowl champion, New England Patriots select Chase.
I want to pause here because the NFL is the highest level a football player can get to. Chase had proven to the world that the fire in his belly and his passion for the game was enough to be among the 1.6% of Division I players who go on to play professionally.
I think a lot of that fire, came from trying to make, my family, my family proud, but in particular, my dad.
What he just said is important because wanting to make other people proud of us is something almost all of us do. And we do it subconsciously because very early in our lives, we learn which behaviors earn us praise and which ones don't. If we get affection or validation when we achieve something or behave in a certain way, we unconsciously equate being worthy with doing good in other people's eyes. Over time, it becomes a feedback loop where we do things that win approval, then we get praise for doing those things, which feels a lot like love, and then we internalize the belief that we're lovable when we perform in ways other people praise us for. The whole thing morphs into what psychologists call the conditional self, which is a self-image built on what gets us approval instead of what feels authentic. That's hard enough as we walk through our own lives. We've got a small group of people we interact with every day, like our families or people we work with. Whether we realize it or not, we do things we don't necessarily want to do in order to get their approval. Like maybe you spend an extra hour double checking the numbers in a report instead of cutting out early to get in a workout because you know your boss loves accuracy. And if you publish anything on social media and then constantly refresh the screen to see how many likes or comments or shares your post got, you're really checking to see if other people are praising you for what you did. And that's how we unconsciously equate being worthy with doing good in other people's eyes. Now imagine Chase's situation, with over 80,000 people showing up to watch him do his job, and then flooding the internet and the airwaves with their opinion about how he did.
I could go out there and I could play decently well, right? Maybe not my best performance historically, et cetera, but I played, from an objective, like football coach's point of view, I played well. The team lost, and it was a super embarrassing game. And so the whole defense is getting crucified, if you will. And, so now every player that's out there is getting viewed through that lens, which isn't even entirely, totally indicative of my individual performance. So you kind of get roped into this, and there's just so many factors that are outside of your control.
Other people's opinions have always been outside of our control, but the way we receive those opinions has changed so fast over the past few decades that our brains haven't been able to keep up. If you go back just 40 years, maybe to the 1980s, there were a relatively small number of people who might criticize something you did. Back to the family members or the people you work with scenario I mentioned a minute ago. That type of criticism was local, it was relational, and it was recoverable. You could talk to the other person, explain yourself, and most often repair the emotional damage that came with someone else rejecting your behavior. Remember from the beginning of the episode that our primitive nervous systems equate being accepted with survival. That's why sometimes criticism can feel like a direct threat. Fast forward to today, and we live in these digital villages of millions of people. When criticism or judgment comes from hundreds or thousands of strangers, especially online, our brains can still interpret it as a direct threat. The difference now is there's no really good way to resolve it. You can't have individual repairing conversations at scale, so you're left with the feeling of essentially being exiled by all of these strangers you'll never meet in person but somehow still care about. In that situation, our only play is to take even more actions we think other people will approve of.
I think that for me, I always kind of had that sort of underlying sort of resentment, so to speak, of being in a position where I had to validate my worth every single week, every single practice. You go in there and the whole team is watching it. And for me, it wasn't about if the play was good or not. It was about, am I enough?
Beneath the surface, most validation seeking is about the fear that if we aren't good enough, we'll be left alone. That's the emotional driver. There's a type of psychological fear loop that happens lightning fast where our thoughts go something like this. If those people don't like me, then I'll lose connection. And if I lose connection, I'll lose love. And if I lose love, then I'll be nothing. That's why even wildly successful people like athletes and artists and CEOs, they still struggle with this just as much as we do. The external world keeps rewarding them for their doing, not their being. So when the cheering and the praise stops, they're left wondering who they are without it. So Chase was dealing with all these questions about what it meant for him to be enough at the same time he was putting his body through a lot of physical abuse. And it wasn't just the games, it was the workouts and the full-speed practices that are happening all week leading up to the games. Not to mention, guys hitting each other in the NFL can generate the same amount of force as getting in a car crash going 30 miles an hour. Chase told me a story about taking a really violent hit one day at practice.
And he stuck me, and I just remember laying there for about a minute, and I couldn't move my body, which to anybody that's had that experience, it's interesting because when you're laying there like that, the feeling of not having any feeling has a feeling. And I just remember going home that night and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I don't know, maybe it just was like it was boiling to the surface. I don't know. But I looked myself in the mirror, it came out of me like, do you love yourself? And if you do, then why are you willing to sacrifice or trade your brain and your body? It's like, is it worth just a few $1 million? Is that all that's worth to you? And I think that once that seed was planted, it was probably the beginning of the end for me.
What he's really asking himself here is if the external validation he was getting from playing football was worth the price he was paying with his body and his emotions, and if his own love for himself would be able to fill the void when the fans stopped cheering.
I think that it was kind of that bridge. Am I worth saving? Am I worth, that feeling? Am I enough?
Those were some pretty big questions for Chase to look at, because up to that point, his entire life had been about football. It was a big part of his identity, and it's what had earned him so much praise and acceptance. He was living out a childhood dream that took years of work to realize. Was he really just going to walk away from it?
The question that I was really put in a tough position with was, do I have the balls to depart from the path that has been laid out for me and the spine to stay there?
The friction in making that decision was between his gut feeling that it was time to move on and the external pressure from the people around him who really couldn't understand why.
My path was football. And so when I diverged from that path, vibrationally, everybody that I had met along that path couldn't understand it, couldn't relate to it. And this unknowingness combined with this sort of uneasy feeling is a very great recipe for animosity. And so not only can they not help you along that transition and really guide you, but they also are kind of, distant from you, like two magnets, like flipped over.
The people who had supported him were already starting to distance themselves. And it wasn't because Chase had done anything wrong. He just wasn't going to keep doing the things that were good in their eyes. The real question was, would the pressure from the outside world be strong enough to change what he knew to be true in his inner world?
I think that up against those two things, either doing something really drastic or forcing yourself into a position where you can reinterpret these things and set your own bar and level rather than trying to, externalize that thing, was a process that, like I said, was extremely painful for me. One of my most painful stretches of my life. And conversely, which I think is usually how it works, was one of my most impactful.
Ultimately, Chase decided to retire from the NFL in 2023 after 5 seasons, and he looked at his retirement as a matter of his own survival.
So if it's not good for your brain, that means every time that you're playing football, you're trading something. And for me, as I became more cognizant of this fact that, ultimately you don't have to deal with potential consequences in that moment, that these consequences, they arise in your early 30s, your mid 30s, and so forth. And that trade was, especially for me, not really being about the money, but it was about being that validation, that feeling that I was finally enough. And trying to fill that hole in my heart. I think that, I realized eventually that trade wasn't worth it for me.
The consequence Chase is talking about is something called CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which can be caused by the repeated head impacts that happen in football. CTE can lead to a list of symptoms nobody wants, things like memory loss, confusion, impulsivity, and eventually a dementia-like decline. Naturally, players have a big concern over this, especially when they realize how likely it is they'll get it. A study by Boston University scanned the brains of 376 former players. 91.7% of them had CTE.
It's one thing, I think, for men in society in particular, where I've realized, it's one thing to be a kamikaze pilot, to die for something. And I think that it's another thing to live for something. I think it's a lot harder. I think that, it's a lot more noble of a cause.
At some point, lots of us reach a threshold moment like Chase did, where the external approval doesn't fill the void and it isn't worth the price we have to pay for it. And that's where the deeper work begins, and we have to learn how to source our worth from things like our presence, our integrity, and our values, rather than outcomes. And it's not that we ever stop wanting to be seen, it's that the need evolves from needing what we do to be approved of to wanting to be understood for who we really are.
I think it's just really poetic, and it speaks to these lessons that, once again, that I learned through that experience of internalizing that validation. Do I still have some measure of, not enoughness, as I spoke about earlier? Sure. And I don't think we could ever truly eliminate that hole, and maybe it's proportional to, your childhood, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that we ourselves can become larger. And by comparison to that hole is therefore smaller.
I believe we get larger when we start to recognize ourselves for how great we are. And I'm not talking about becoming egotistical. I'm talking about being more open to ourselves. Open to the acceptance we've been seeking from others to finally land home where we start accepting ourselves. For most of us, that sounds simple enough, but it's a really tall order because the majority of our thoughts are directed towards what we see as our own shortcomings. Another way to say that is we aren't good at praising ourselves because we've been giving that power to other people our entire lives. And once you understand that, you start to understand yourself differently.
You can only live life moving forward, but you can only understand it looking backwards. That's the only time that you can actually connect the dots.
That might be why we feel a little lost sometimes. Because it's tough to connect the dots in real time as the praise we get, starting when we're really young, starts to shape our choices and the things that we do. In the moment, we don't realize we're putting on a kind of performance that validates our worth through the praise other people give us. And that's okay, because the moment we start to notice it is the moment it starts to get better.
I've asked a bunch of people this, and it's been universal so far. Would you rather the world or God or the universe, whatever you want to call it, bring you what you want or what you need? And I got what I needed.
Through Chase's story and my own, and just about everybody I've ever met, we all want to feel like we're enough. You've heard in this episode that we unconsciously equate being worthy with doing good in other people's eyes. But it might be a good time to consider flipping that belief, and that being good in our own eyes is enough for us to feel worthy. The need for validation, it's still there. That's not going away. We just get it from ourselves without being attached to something we accomplish. I believe that starts by loving ourselves without the condition of what we perceive as success, and accept that every day we're doing the best we can for that day. It also means we need to acknowledge ourselves for the thousands of great things we do, instead of focusing on the one or two things we do that aren't so great. I like to think of that part kind of like learning to love anyone else, which we do by noticing what's great about them and allowing that to be enough, to outweigh the parts of them we don't think are so great. I believe if we can do that for others, we can do it for ourselves too. Thanks so much for listening to the episode today. It is an absolute joy to put these things together. I hope you feel more enough after listening to this episode. This is something that I think we all struggle with so much. And through Chase's story, I think it's a very, very good angle because we view people that are in the limelight, in the spotlight, as not really human, like they don't have any problems. And that's why he was such a great character for this story. And I'm so grateful for him being so open and so willing to share what he was feeling as he's playing this game that are like really our modern day gladiators. As always, I would greatly appreciate it if you believe the show is worth a 5-star rating, to rate that show 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening to it on. And if you know somebody that feels like maybe they're not enough in their own lives, I'd be grateful if you'd share this episode with them as well. That's it for today, guys. I will see you on the next episode, which I look forward to. Better Beliefs is owned by 6350 Ventures and is produced, written, edited, and recorded by me, Brent Kokel. Yes, I do all the things. The original artwork for this show was created by Jenny H. Designs, and original music for the opening of the Better Beliefs podcast is by the Lonely Ramblers. All other song credits can be found in the show notes.